I would love to make a really nice video about a fun and uplifting topic from the Bible, but sadly, we must once again cover a subject that is truly boring. Just as the old slogan used to go, all roads lead to Rome, perhaps we need a new slogan that says, most textual problems come from the jealous scholars. And why are they jealous? Because we have a perfect Bible and don't need them or their teachings. They can't lord it over people if everyone has equal access to God's perfect word. So they find something that's not perfect and start shining all of their attention on it. They don't realize it, but this turns into a form of worship. They found some lousy Greek translation of the Old Testament and say that we should follow it. The scholars try and find problems that don't exist so that they can come in and fix the problems. And then you'll think they're swell, and then you'll be more agreeable to spend your money on their 12-part seminar on how to finally understand the Bible, thanks to them. To accomplish their goals, they selected a Greek manuscript called the Septuagint. So, what is a Septuagint? Well, as you can tell already, it's a boring subject. The only ones getting excited about this are the jealous scholars. Anytime you want to charge people money when you don't have much to offer them, you need to use Greek or Latin phrases to make what you are selling seem more important than it really is. And you need to use big, fancy words to make things sound more important than they are. For example, you can specialize in the treatment of Canis lupus familiaris, or you can simply feed the dog. The Septuagint is a fancy Latin word which means the 70. It's also referred to by the Roman numeral acronym LXX because scholars are lazy and they depend on abbreviations whenever possible. For many years, we've had the correct Hebrew Old Testament, but the scholars living in Alexandria, Egypt, wanted to have the Old Testament in the Greek language instead. At least that's what a guy named Origen wanted. Origen lived in Alexandria, Egypt, and he never met a manuscript that he didn't think needed his personal touch. So he and his cronies created the Septuagint. But like most scholars, he needed people to take his translation seriously. After all, the real Bible was still being read and distributed all over, and people would have gone right on by ignoring his little sidestep translation in Egypt. So the scholars hatched a plan to add credibility to the Septuagint. What Origen needed was a celebrity endorsement, someone recognizable and respected. And what bigger celebrity could you get than Jesus Christ and his apostles? But there was just one problem. His Septuagint was created around 300 AD, not before Christ. And you would have needed to convince people that your Greek translation was written before Christ so that Jesus and his apostles would have had access to it and quoted from it. And so one of the stupidest fairy tales was created out of thin air. So gather around, boys and girls, as the scholars dazzle us with their brilliance. Once upon a time, around 250 BC, in a land called Egypt, there lived a lonely little king named Ptolemy Philadelphus II, or as his friends used to call him, PP. For those of you that have trouble with maps, here is Egypt. It's at this point in time I must interrupt this fairy tale and remind you that God had told the Jews to not return to Egypt. So any Jews found down in Egypt at this time would be out of God's will. It will make sense in a moment why I am pointing this out to you. If you were a Jew in Egypt at this time and someone asked you to work on a Bible translation, God would not be cheering you on. I also must point out that there were a few disobedient Jews living in Egypt during this time, and it's at this point that we return to the fairy tale. PP looked around one day and said, "Boy, I sure have a lot of apostate Jews running around here. I wonder if I shouldn't give them something that would make them happy. After all, we Egyptian kings have always wanted to make Hebrews happy." "I've got it," said PP. "We will give the Jews a Greek translation in the Greek language of Gentiles. They'll love it. What Jew wouldn't want a copy of their scriptures in the language of a Gentile nation? This will make all of these apostate Jews living down here in Egypt think I'm a pretty swell guy. I'm also pretty sure the Egyptians down here would love to have a copy of the Hebrew scriptures in Greek so that they could read them as well. This idea is a win-win for everyone. I will send word and locate 6 scholars from each of the 12 tribes of Israel, even though at this point in time they are scattered and would not be easily located, and they wouldn't want to come here because God told them not to come to Egypt at this point in time. But I'm sure my plan will work out just fine. So then Jack climbed down the beanstalk and, oops, sorry about that, wrong fairy tale. According to the scholars, 6 top-notch Jews from each of the 12 tribes were located from the scattered countries. And they just couldn't wait to pack their bags and move to Egypt so they could make a Greek translation of the Old Testament. Now, of course, any self-respecting Jew from the tribe of Benjamin or Judah or anybody other than from the tribe of Levi wouldn't touch this with a 10-foot pole. We have verse after verse letting us know that the Levites were responsible for preserving the scriptures. In Malachi chapter 2, verse 7 and 8, it says, "For the priest's lips should keep knowledge, and they should seek the law at his mouth. For he is the messenger of the Lord of hosts. But ye are departed out of the way. Ye have caused many to stumble at the law. Ye have corrupted the covenant of Levi, saith the Lord of hosts." In Deuteronomy chapter 31, it says, "And it came to pass, when Moses made an end of writing the words of this law in a book, until they were finished, that Moses commanded the Levites, which bear the ark of the covenant of the Lord, saying, Take this book of the law and put it in the side of the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God, that it may be there for a witness against thee." Even when the Jews got captured and taken to Babylon, a Levite named Ezra is still a custodian of the scriptures. So even if you could have gathered those 72 Jewish scholars and brought them down to Egypt, God would not have blessed their efforts because they would have been out of God's will. And yes, you may have noticed that when they say they went and found 6 Jews from each tribe, that would have equaled 72. And yet the word Septuagint means the 70. Oh, brother. Now you say, how does one defend such a stupid blunder like that? And I would say, don't blame me, it's not my fairy tale, but this is what you end up dealing with when you listen to the scholars who demand that you take them seriously. But the so-called scholars never let the facts get in the way of telling you that the Septuagint was translated before Christ. You can't reason with them. They'll tell you that the apostles all referenced the Septuagint and even quoted from it. And here's where they didn't notice something very important. For example, when Origen and his cronies made the Septuagint, they already had a copy of the completed New Testament on their table. And Origen saw a small detail in the book of Hebrews. By faith, Jacob, when he was a-dying, blessed both the sons of Joseph and worshipped, leaning upon the top of his staff. When Origen saw that detail about Jacob leaning on his staff, he thought to himself, if I add that detail to my translation of Genesis, then it will appear as if the Apostle Paul was quoting my translation instead of the Hebrew Old Testament. This will make my translation seem old and respected. So with that, the scholars can pretend to finally get their celebrity endorsement. They can then claim that the apostles preferred the Septuagint over the Hebrew scriptures, and who's going to argue with an apostle? So Origen added the part where Jacob was leaning on his staff to his Septuagint copy of Genesis chapter 47. And the NIV went along with the Septuagint and put the staff that Jacob leaned on into the NIV text of Genesis chapter 47 as well. But wait a minute. Those stupid Septuagint translators should have inserted it into chapter 48 instead of chapter 47. Well, they shouldn't have inserted it at all, but if they were going to do something that bad, like adding to the scriptures, then they should have at least added it to the spot being talked about. I could continue to bore you to tears with further examples of the mistakes in the Septuagint, but let's start tying up the loose ends. They claim that Jesus referred to the Septuagint instead of the Hebrew scriptures, but if that were so, then why did Jesus say, For verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth pass, one jot or one tittle shall in no wise pass from the law, till all be fulfilled. And most everyone knows that a jot is the smallest letter in the Hebrew alphabet. If Jesus were using a Greek translation, why would he refer to the Hebrew letters? You'd think those smart scholars would know that, but they're too busy lording it over us, the common people. And therefore, it's very hard to teach them anything. They'll ignore everything I've just said and go right back to their talking points. They'll say that the Greek language had practically taken over the world at this time, and there would have been a Greek translation of the Old Testament out of necessity. And yet, when the Apostle Paul gets arrested in the book of Acts, he motions to the people to listen to him, and then he speaks to them in Hebrew. This would be about 300 years after they claimed the Septuagint was written, because everyone needed Greek. Now, you might notice at this time that they sure are going to a lot of trouble to prop up the ridiculous Septuagint, and they demand we set aside our traditional Old Testament that has served us faithfully over the years. Well, there's two reasons why they do this. Number one, the Septuagint had the Apocrypha in it. And if they could convince you that the apostles all used the Septuagint, then that would also mean that the apostles endorse and recommend the Apocrypha as well. Pretty sneaky, huh? Who could forget the stupid things that are in the Apocrypha, like using smoke from a fish's heart to drive away evil spirits? Or how about giving your money to the poor, and that will help keep you out of hell? And that giving money will even take away the sins of dead people, which is a neat trick when you think about it. Or that Nebuchadnezzar was the king of the Assyrians. And all of this time I thought he was the king of the Babylonians. Boy, was I surprised. And that some guy named Antiochus Epiphanes died in 3 different places at 3 different times. And you thought you had a rough day. And the second reason why they insist that Jesus and the apostles use the Septuagint is, everyone can see, that it is riddled with mistakes. And some scholars even admit that having errors in the Septuagint is a good thing for them. Here's Doug Kudelek, and here's what he had to say about it. If the Septuagint existed in the days of Christ and the apostles, and if Christ and the apostles often quoted from it as authoritative, and if the Septuagint is demonstrably a less than perfect translation of the Hebrew text, as it admittedly is, then we have a clear case of Jesus and the apostles making good use of and deriving spiritual profit from an uninspired, imperfectly preserved translation. In short, the example of Christ and the apostles in their use of the Septuagint version of the Old Testament demonstrates that it was not necessary that they, or we, have an infallible and inspired, perfectly preserved translation before they could know or serve God. So we're right back to them being jealous of a perfect translation. The scholars want there to be mistakes in the scriptures, and only they can correct them, so that we, the common people, can come and grovel at their feet and say to them, "Teach us, for we are not worthy." Now, none of them will ever admit that. They might actually be clueless as to what the end result of their actions truly are. The Bible has a phrase for them. It's called willingly ignorant. You need to get away from them as fast as you can. Not all of us have given up our perfect Bible. Although our numbers are dwindling, there are still some of us that still hold to the truth. Because of that, we are the outcasts of Christianity. We are embarrassing to them. We are not wanted in their little Bible studies and get-togethers. And when we do separate from them, they try and make us feel guilty and call us troublemakers. The sad comedy in all of this is they think we are the stupid ones.